Hi students, hope you are all fine. Today we are going to discuss some important topics from the lesson friction. In the previous class you have studied about two types of forces. One is contact force and the other one is non-contact force. You have also studied what is a contact force. A force that comes to play only when there is a contact between the two surfaces. Friction comes under contact force. You might have observed near the traffic signal, a truck driver slows his vehicle. You might have observed that when we apply the brakes to the cycle slows down. At the same time, a rolling ball will stop after some time. All these things you might have observed. Why it is so? There is a force that is acting opposite to the direction of motion. There is a force acting between the two surfaces in the contact. And you might have also seen that we slip and fall when we stamp on a banana peel. And we also find it difficult to walk on a muddy track or wet floor. What is the reason behind this? The answers to the questions will be provided in this lesson. First and foremost thing, what is this friction? Friction is nothing but it is an opposing force. It always acts in a direction opposite to the direction of motion. I will give you an example. Suppose you want to push a book. If you want to push it from the right side, the frictional force will act in the left side. If you want to push the book from the left side, the frictional force will act in the right side. Frictional force will always act in the direction opposite to the direction of motion. Now let us study what are the factors that are affecting friction. There are two factors that are affecting friction. With the help of some activity, we will discuss what are the two factors. The first activity is when you try to pull a brick by using a spring balance. Now you will ask, what is the spring balance? A spring balance is a device that is used to measure the force exerted by an object. It consists of a coiled spring and it is also having a graduated scale. So when the force is exerted by the object, the spring elongates and then we are able to get a reading with the help of a pointer in the graduated scale. So we are trying to pull this brick with the help of a spring balance by tying it to a string. With the help of the spring balance, you can calculate the amount of friction. With the help of the spring balance, we can measure the force of friction. When you try to pull it, the instant where the object begins to move, you can measure the force of friction. If you wrap it with a polythene cover, it will be easy for us to pull it because the surface is smooth. The same thing if you do it with a gunny bag or a jute bag, it will be a bit difficult because the surface is rough. From this activity, what did you understand? We understand that friction depends upon the nature of the surfaces. Another one activity I would like to discuss, that is the activity with an inclined plane and a pencil cell. Suppose you take a pencil cell and roll it through an inclined plane. You have to make a point A on the inclined plane. When the pencil cell is rolling down, the pencil cell will move to a certain distance if it is made to roll on a smooth surface. Suppose you are spreading a cloth on the surface, the pencil cell will move to less distance. And the same thing if you are doing it with the sand. If you are spreading sand on the table, it will move a lesser distance. It will be comparatively moving more distance if it is moved through a smooth surface. So here also we understand the fact that friction depends upon the smoothness or the roughness of the surface. Friction depends upon the nature of surfaces in contact. See, even though the surfaces appear to be perfectly smooth, they are not actually smooth. There may be irregularities in the surface. When the irregularities of one surface interlock into the irregularities of other surface, the object will not move. Another one example what I would like to discuss with you is when we try to push a box, there is a force acting between the box and the ground. So if you have to push the box, you have to apply a force that should overcome the friction that is acting between the two surfaces. So the force that is required to overcome the friction, at an instant the object begins to move, will give you the measure of the static friction. And the force that is required to keep an object moving with the same speed will give you the measure of the sliding friction. Sliding friction is less than static friction. It is easy to move an object that is already in motion rather than to start an object that is at rest. It is easy to move an object. So sliding friction is always less than static friction because once the object begins to move, the contact points do not get enough time to interlock into one another. So we have introduced two types of friction. One is sliding friction and the other one is static friction. So, sliding friction is lesser than static friction, because once the object begins to move, the contact points do not get enough time to interlock into one another. At the same time, we might have observed that it is easy to pull a mat when nobody is sitting on it, but it is difficult to pull a mat when the two, that is when the two surfaces are pressed harder. When somebody is sitting in the mat, it is difficult for us to pull the mat because the two surfaces are pressed harder. So, another one factor is when the two surfaces are pressed harder, it is difficult to pull the object, because when the two surfaces are pressed harder, friction is more. So, friction depends upon two conditions. One is it depends upon the nature of the surfaces, smoothness and roughness of the surface. At the same time, friction increases when the two surfaces are pressed harder. Okay. Now, let us study why friction is called a necessary evil. From the term itself, you can understand why it is called necessary evil. It is having a lot of advantages, at the same time it is having a lot of disadvantages. We won't be able to hold a glass which is covered with a layer of oil, because it will slip and fall from our hand. What is the reason for that? It is because the friction is less there. We are not able to walk on a muddy track. We are not able to walk on a muddy floor. There also the friction is less. Now, let us study what are the advantages of friction. We cannot hold an object if there is no friction. We cannot write if there is no friction. The teacher, when she writes on the board with the chalk, there is a friction acting between the chalk and the board. We are not able to even tie a knot if there is no friction. If you want to pierce a nail on the wall, there should be friction. Only then we will be able to do that. At the same time, we cannot construct a building if there is no friction. We cannot stop a moving vehicle if there is no friction. The next thing that we are going to discuss is, we are going to discuss about the disadvantages of friction. Friction is having a lot of advantages. At the same time, friction is also having disadvantages. When you rub your hands, you know that heat is produced. At the same time, when you light a matchstick, the heat is produced. It is getting ignited. The chemicals that are present on the head of the matchstick is getting ignited and it is producing heat. So, friction produces a lot of heat, and because of this heat, a lot amount of energy is getting wasted. It causes unnecessary wear and tear in the machinery parts. The soles of our footwear get spoiled. Overhead bridges, the steps at the lower end steps get worn out because of friction. The tires of the vehicles get spoiled because of friction. So, all these things are the disadvantages of friction. Friction produces a lot of heat. In our appliances that we use in our day-to-day life, friction produces heat, and because of this heat, a lot amount of energy is getting wasted. I hope you have understood about the advantages and disadvantages of friction. Now, next topic that we are going to deal with is how to increase and decrease friction. What are the factors that are used to increase and decrease friction? In order to increase friction, you might have seen that the tires of the vehicles are treated to get a better grip on the ground. At the same time, the soles of the footwear are grooved in order to be able to walk properly on the ground. So, these are the factors to increase friction. At the same time, you might have seen that brake pads are provided in the brake system. When we press the brake pads arrest the rim of the vehicle. So, there the friction is produced. We are able to stop the vehicle when we press the brakes because of that. The brake pads are arresting the rim of the vehicle. At the same time, kabaddi players apply some sand in their hand in order to get a better grip. There also we are trying to increase friction. And gymnasts apply some coarse material in the hands in order to get a better grip. These are the ways to increase friction. At the same time, to decrease friction, what do? We make use of lubricants. Now, you will ask, what are these lubricants? Oil and grease are applied to the parts of the machine in order to decrease friction. Lubricants form a separate layer between the two surfaces in contact. So, there won't be a direct brushing of the two layers, and so it reduces friction. At the same time, you might have seen that we sprinkle powder on the carom board. That is also to reduce the friction. In some machines, we are making use of air cushions instead of lubricants to reduce friction. I hope you have understood what are the method to reduce and increase friction. At the same time, wheels also reduce friction. You might have seen that people are pulling the luggages by fitting the rollers under it. Why do we use these rollers? It is better to roll an object rather than to slide an object. Suppose you take a book and keep it on the top of 3 pencils. When you try to roll the book, it is easy for us to roll the book rather than sliding the book. Heavy loads can be transferred from one place to another by keeping logs under it. Rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. Now you will ask, what is this rolling friction? When one object is rolling on the surface of another object, the resistance to the motion is called a rolling friction. Rolling friction is the least. So it is better to roll an object rather than to slide an object. Rolling friction can be provided by using the rollers under the luggages. In case of some machines, sliding friction is replaced to rolling friction by using ball bearings. We use ball bearings in the hubs and axles of fan and the bicycles. So these are some of the ways how we reduce the friction. Even though air is very light, air also offers a resistance to motion. Liquids also offer resistance to the objects that are moving through. So what are these liquids and gases together called? The liquids and gases together are called a fluid, and the force of friction exerted by the fluid is called a drag. The word given for the friction, that is fluid friction, is drag. Fluid friction depends upon the nature of the fluid through which the object is moving, the speed of the object through the fluid. It also depends upon the shape of the object that is moving through the fluid. So we have taken examples from the nature to reduce friction. You might have seen that birds are able to fly in the sky. At the same time, we have made the shape of the aeroplane in the form of birds. It is a streamlined shape, tapered at the ends, and center it is thickened. At the same time, we use the example of fish to construct a boat. That is also a streamlined shape. So this shape reduces friction. So in order to reduce the friction, we have taken examples from the nature. We have made aeroplanes in the shape of birds, and we have made ship in the shape of fishes in order to reduce friction. I hope you have understood all the content that has been taught today. What did we learn today? We learned what is friction. We learned the factors which are affecting friction. We learned what are the advantages and disadvantages of friction. We learned how to reduce and increase friction, and we also studied about fluid friction. I hope you have understood all the content that has been taught today. Thank you, children. Have a nice day. Bye.